welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today we're going to talk about death anxiety. This is a topic I swore I thought I had already done an episode on, but apparently I haven't. Or if I have, I didn't put it on my spreadsheet. I just kind of forgot that it existed. But I feel like this is a very important topic. On occasion, when I'm talking about what I do for a living, I get a little bit of pushback, or I get weird looks, or I get the type of response where, people are clearly uncomfortable, or the why on earth would you want to do that for a living, or how can you even think about that? Overall, most of the response I get is supportive and, like, oh, thank you, that's a great service. But on occasion, I've been set up at some festivals and or like expos, things like that, with my little booth, and I will invariably, like, one out of every maybe 20 people that walk up to my booth, look down at my paperwork and do a immediate 180 and walk away. Or I've even had people so much as go, ugh, and I get quite a reaction about what I do. And I understand. And I never judge people for that. I don't feel bad. It does not hurt my feelings in the least, because I had a period in my life where I would think about death or dead bodies or dead people or dying and just go, ugh, that's icky. That's gross. Why would anybody want to deal with that, right? It's normal. It is normal. But so we're going to talk about why some people are afraid of death. I'm afraid of death at times. Of course I am. It's totally normal. We're going to talk about a little bit about death anxiety, why we might have it, what we can do about it, and everything in between. Okay. But before we get into that, I have to do my due diligence once a week and remind you guys to check me out on Patreon. You can find me at patreon.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula, and you will get access to this podcast a week early. You will get grief affirmations once a week. You will get access to monthly check-ins by me, where I talk a little bit about my work and what's been going on and personal feelings and thoughts. Yikes. And you will also get a shout out on the podcast. And be sure to look at the different tiers, because different tiers get different benefits. My top level tier, you get free coaching sessions once a month, and you can get a shout out on my podcast. I think I already said that. And I just finished recording my very first workshop. I'm going to have that up pretty soon, and you will have access to that for free. All right, enough of that. Let's start talking. I can blah, blah about myself later. That's not why you're here. You want to learn about grief and death and all things in between. So first of all, death anxiety, which you may also have heard the term thanatophobia, which I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly. I looked it up, and I do believe that is correct. But thanatophobia is the fear of one's own death or the fear of the dying process. So death anxiety, like I said, first of all, totally normal. And it's something we all face at one point or another in our lives. I can remember being very young, and when I first kind of started fully understanding what death and being dead was, I had little tiny, like 6-year-old Nikki existential crises, because I grew up in a Christian household, and I grew up with those beliefs and was told, you go to heaven when you die. And I can very specifically remember laying in bed thinking, wow, when I die, I get to go to heaven. And I thought, well, what's heaven like? And I started thinking, like, won't I get bored after a while? And it's just like it spiraled into a horrendous existential crisis, which is probably why I'm so messed up. I had existential crises at like 7 years old on the concept of eternity. Anyway, but that is honestly one thing that scares some people, is the thought of eternity, because we as humans can't quite grasp the concept of timelessness, of eternity, because all we know and all we experience is time as we know it in our lives on this planet, if that makes sense. I'm not going to get too philosophical here, because I'm not a philosopher. I have friends that are, but I am not. So we won't get into that right now. And honestly, I took a philosophy class in college because I had to, and it broke me in ways I cannot express. I had moments of I couldn't grasp some of these concepts, and some of them I did, and it scared the hell out of me. My husband is really into space and astronomy and learning about, all the stuff out there. And I refuse to watch any of those YouTube videos with him because they scare me. Because again, my tiny little lizard brain can't grasp the concept of our universe. I mean, none of us really can. We can speculate and have theories and make little charts as to what these sizes really are, but we can never fully grasp it. And yeah, my tiny little lizard brain just breaks down. But all that to say, when we think about death and dying, these are concepts we also can't really fully understand and grasp because we don't really understand and know what happens after we die. There's no way we can know that. And yes, before anybody comes at me with the whole, I know because we go to heaven, or I know because nothing happens, or okay, we will get into that. I promise. But overall, I mean, this is just a truth. This is truth that we don't know what happens when we die. And so that's scary for us because our little lizard brains don't have this information in them. And we need desperately to fill in those blanks. And when we can't, it scares us. It really freaks us out. That's fine. That's totally normal. Feeling uneasy about the end of life and death and dying is completely natural. Fear of the unknown and what happens is also completely normal and natural. There was a study or a series of studies on a concept called terror management theory. I read up on this quite a bit before I started recording, and I still don't fully understand this, but I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. If you want to understand it better, look it up. But basically, terror management theory is suggesting humans, we can recognize our own mortality. And because of this, we have to manage this existential crisis and anxiety and fear all the time. And we have to understand and know that our time on this earth is limited. And other animals and beings don't have that. They might, we don't know. Like, we understand there are instincts of animals to stay alive, but they don't necessarily understand that they're going to die and what death is, right? They might see other animals that are dead and be like, oh, they're not moving, but they don't have the same level of consciousness we do. Again, maybe they do. We don't know. I don't want to debate that, but we're burdened with this knowledge that we're going to die and that our time is limited. And because of that, we have anxiety and we have existential crises at 7 years old in your bedroom laying at night. And again, this is all okay. But the theory of this is basically that we try to protect ourselves against our they use the term mortality salience or awareness of our own death. We have to protect ourselves against this because if we live in this constant fear and anxiety, we're going to go insane. So we have to try to alleviate ourselves from this. So how do we alleviate? What helps in these situations? And I'll get into more specific coping mechanisms, things like that, but things that affect our level of our awareness and our fear and anxiety are things like our culture and worldviews. And they specifically had several studies that said self-esteem played a huge role in our anxiety on death and dying, which I found incredibly fascinating. Again, I read through some of these studies and I just didn't fully grasp it. I'm not very bright sometimes, but I got what they were going for. But things like our worldviews, our cultures. I talked in the beginning about, when I had my little mini existential crisis, thinking about heaven. There are cultures and religious beliefs about what happens when we die. There are some religions that believe we go to heaven. There are some religions that believe we don't go anywhere. And there are some beliefs that may not be tied to a religion that, we're all energy and matter and it all just disperses throughout the universe and we become other things. There's a million theories out there, but these are things that can help us, whether conscious or unconscious, in dealing with our anxiety on death and dying. So if you are a really staunch Christian and you are very firm in your faith and your belief, then you know that you're going to go to heaven when you die. And that is something that helps ease that anxiety. And Whether you agree with that or don't, that's your decision, but we all have something that kind of helps us work through this. Even every atheist and every agnostic I know has their own thoughts and their own beliefs as to what happens when we die, and they're at comfort with it for the most part. We also have cultural beliefs. Most of these tend to end up being tied to religious beliefs as well. But I talked about self-esteem earlier. Self-esteem does tend to play a role in this. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're feeling confident all the time, you're feeling good about yourself, then you might still fear death. You might still think, well, I don't know what happens, but I know things are going really well right now. And that's all that matters. I'm happy. Things are going well for me. And I think I'm a good person. And that can kind of help unconsciously ease that anxiety and other anxieties as well. You might live in a culture that really reveres the dead. There are some cultures I've talked about in the past where they exhume their loved ones once a year and change their clothes, wash their body, have them sit at the table. I know that sounds weird to some of us. I've talked about this before in my episodes on culture, but they put their loved ones at the table. They'd wash their corpse. They put fresh clothes on them. And because of that, they know when they die, that's going to happen for them. Their loved ones are going to do the same thing for them, which what a beautiful thing. I know so many people might think that's absolutely disgusting. And you are entitled to believe whatever you would like to believe. I personally find that a little beautiful that they have such reverence and honor for their deceased loved ones that they would do something like that. But these beliefs, these thoughts, and these cultural upbringings can have a sense of immortality for us, be it literal or metaphorical. You might believe that you go to another plane, you go to another existence, you move on to something else, and in that you will continue to live forever. There's also feelings of a metaphorical immortality, like leaving behind a legacy, or let's say you are just such an awesome human that there are statues of you somewhere. These are things that are a bit more of a metaphorical immortality, or just being one of those people that you will get talked about after your death. There's a famous quote, I'm blanking right at this moment who said it, so I'm sorry, but was it Mark Twain? You truly die when the last person who has known you speaks your name. And I think we all kind of have that knowledge and that fear that one day our existence on this planet will be completely forgotten unless we're written down somewhere in a book and somebody happens across our name. But thinking about all these things, and I hope I'm not freaking anybody out right now. If I am, I'm sorry. I like to wax philosophical sometimes on these topics, but I also do this for a living and deal with this all the time. So now that we kind of understand a little bit about death anxiety and what it is and what kind of shapes it and what can help with it, there are other ways to cope, other ways to work through this fear of death and get a little more comfortable with it. First thing, talk about it. I believe I mentioned more than once on here, I hold a monthly death cafe. I have one in person here in Columbus, and I do a virtual one as well. And if you look it up, you can go to deathcafe.com and put in your city and state and country and whatever, and they will tell you if or where there is a death cafe near to you. There's virtual ones too. But I'm sorry, I have to share this real quick. There's a lady I met who went through the same organization I went through for my end-of-life doula training. We have a meeting once a month for all of us who have gone through the training to just get together and kind of support each other, ask questions, whatever. It's peer mentoring. And there's a lady I met there who holds a death cafe and Second Life, which if you're not familiar, it's not I don't want to call it a video game, but it's basically like a interactive computer program where you can create a second life. You get to have an avatar. You can be who you want. It's incredibly fascinating. But within that, she holds a death cafe, and it is incredibly popular. So many people show up. But a death cafe, if you are new to this podcast or have never heard of this before, is basically where people just get together, have some tea and coffee and maybe some snacks, and just talk about anything death and dying related. And I can hear whenever I bring this up, there's always somebody's like, why on earth would you do that? Like, that's exactly why, because of not people like you, but because of responses like that. Death is so stigmatized, and some people want to talk about it because they're scared, they're confused. They might have a loved one who is in the process of dying, and they have questions and thoughts, and we stigmatize it so much that there's no safe place to talk about it. I can remember when I was younger, my friends teasing me and calling me morbid and Wednesday Addams because I like to talk about that kind of stuff. And even like my parents being like, why are you so morbid? And it's, maybe I was, I don't know, but I talk about things that scare me. When I'm nervous, I talk a lot. When I'm scared about an event coming up, or I have terrible flight anxiety. So before I get on a plane, like the week leading up to that flight, I'm a mess and I'm just talking about it constantly because that's how I process it. That's what helps me. So giving people a safe space where they can talk about their fears, anxieties, or just talk about death in general is a beautiful gift. So that's something you can do if you have this anxiety, is find a death cafe, talk about it with people. Just knowing there are other people out there that are scared too can be super helpful. You can read about things around death and dying. I can give you book recommendations till the end of time. If you want all the books I've ever read, you let me know. You can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com and shoot me a message there or on all my socials and just be like, Nikki, give me some book recs. But if you really are nervous or scared on death and dying, there's a book I would recommend. I really enjoy reading books by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk. You've probably seen or heard of him. He passed away somewhat recently, but he was a very influential Buddhist monk who has written tons and tons of books and meditations on everything. And he has a book called No Death, No Fear, Comforting Wisdom for Life. And within that, he does have guided meditations and tells personal stories and anecdotes that kind of help people ease up your fear. And this fear of death, but fear of anything really. His meditations are so calming to me. I listen to him on YouTube or on Spotify. He also has an app called Plum Village, and there's all sorts of meditations on there. But this book in particular was really, really good. I highly recommend this. But you can find other books. I'm always recommending anything by Caitlin Doughty. Like, she's my patron saint. She's the reason why I'm here. Literally, as I was plugging my microphone in, somebody I hadn't talked to in a long time texted me. It was like, hey, have you read this book? And it was her first book. I was like, oh my God, yes. Anyway, anything by Caitlin Doughty. But you can read books on these things. Meditation is incredibly helpful. I know this is scary, but I encourage you at some point to sit down and truly think about your death. You don't have to think about what happens after. You don't have to think about the dying process. Just think about the fact that you will die one day. And it's going to be scary. You might start to have a little bit of panic with it. Breathe. Do some deep breathing. You can do square breathing, which always helps me. I do square breathing when I meditate in general, which is where you breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts. So think of a square with 4 counts on each side. And that can at least help ease your anxiety in that moment. But the more you contemplate on it, the more you think about it, the less it will bother you after time. It's like anything. The more you practice something, the easier it gets, right? The more you talk about something, the less scary it is. So thinking about it, talking about it, these are all ways you can help cope with that. And I know so many people are just like so ick about it, and they're like, I don't want to think about it. And I appreciate that, and I would never push that on anybody, right? But giving yourself the power to face it takes the power away from death, right? It's like anything. You can take that power back and give it to yourself. So if you're one of those people that's like, no, I refuse to do that, that's okay. You're not ready. When you are ready, go for it. But wait until you are. And it will be scary. It's part of life is being uncomfortable sometimes. I work out every day. Do you think I love working out? I mean, yes, sometimes I do. But other days, I just want to lay in bed all day. I don't want to get up and do a Tabata or, a chest and back workout. Sometimes I just want to lay in bed, but I do it and I'm uncomfortable. But then when I'm done, I feel so much better. You have to have moments of uncomfortableness, discomfort. You have to have moments of discomfort in your life to appreciate the comfort. Okay, I could wax philosophical on that all day too. But finally, the most important thing you can do to help alleviate anxiety on death. Are you ready? Here it comes. Live your life authentically, passionately, and as fully as you possibly can. When we live our lives as we want them to be, if we live life to the fullest, we can conquer our fear of death. Okay. How was that? You guys feeling okay? Did I freak anybody out too much? I hope not. Yeah. Okay. If I did freak you out, I'm really sorry. Please come back. Please give me another chance. I hope I didn't scare anybody too bad. And if you skip this episode, that's fine. Well, you're not hearing this anyway, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, just know that you're allowed to be scared of death and dying. Like I said, I do this for a living. I deal with this every day. Well, not every day, but I deal with this a lot. I'm still scared of it. Of course I am. I still have moments where I'm absolutely scared of death and dying and what happens. That's okay. But I try to live my life as best I can so I can just enjoy right now and worry about that later. All right, enough. It's the end of the episode, so it is now time for the Death Deck. Woo! So I'm actually pulling from the End of Life deck this time. Why not? I haven't read from this one for a few episodes. I'm going to pull one at random. Oh, well, these are end of life, so it's going to be topical. But how concerned are you about your family members after you are gone? A, I'm worried and it's keeping me up at night. B, I feel somewhat confident they will be okay. Or C, I have peace of mind they will be all right. Well, for myself, for those of you new here, I always answer these too, but I encourage you to think about these questions. I wouldn't say it's keeping me up at night, but I do worry. And only because, first of all, I have my living will in place. I have my final will in place. All my paperwork is done. I believe everybody knows what my wishes are at this point. So that part doesn't concern me. My family will know what to do. That is handled. What does concern me is if I were to die now while my parents are still alive. Because my only sibling died in 2015, I am their only remaining child, and I don't think they could handle it. I know that sounds awful. I hope that doesn't sound too awful, but it's true. I don't know if my mom especially could handle losing me too. And that does scare the heck out of me. That I try not to think about that, but if I do, that would absolutely keep me up at night. My husband, of course I worry about him. I think he would be okay after some time, but I also think he would be absolutely devastated to lose me. And I'm not saying that to sound cocky or like I am all that and a bag of potato chips, but I know he loves me very, very much, and I think he would be devastated if I was gone. I would be if he was gone. You kidding me? All right. Enough of that. Good God, that was a bit of a downer for the end of this episode, wasn't it? Well, shucks. So thanks for tuning in. Okay. You can find me on the socials. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I am at Nikki the Death Doula. You can find my website, nikkithedeathdoula.com. Please reach out to me in any one of those. I'd love to hear from you, hear what you think about this show and whatever. I always want to know people's answers to the Death Deck questions. If you really enjoyed today's episode or my podcast in general, do me a huge solid and leave me a review. That is a huge way for more people to find me. I've got a handful of reviews out there. Thank you so much to everybody who's reviewed me thus far. If you have not, please take a moment to do that. That's like the best thing you can do for a podcaster. And tell a friend about it too. If you have a friend you think you might enjoy this, send it to them. If you hear an episode and you're like, oh, my friend needs to hear this, send it to them. They might love this. They might hate it. I don't know. That's up to them. But all that to say, leave me a review. It's huge. If you want to do more, if you want to go a little bit above and beyond, I mentioned at the top of the episode, you can support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula. You heard about all my benefits, so I won't repeat those, but that would be a huge support to me as well. I don't make a dime on this podcast. I don't have enough listeners for ads. Ads feel icky anyway, but I literally make nothing on this, and I spend several hours a week working on these episodes. So please, that would be amazing. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you and wish you nothing but the best. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, grief doesn't always have to suck.